This video is for entertainment purposes only. None of the information you're about to hear should be considered medical advice, and you should always consult a licensed medical practitioner before embarking on a health or lifestyle change. Okay, so this week we're with Rick from Twinbrook Acres. That's the name of your current YouTube channel, is it?
Yeah, that's correct. I just noticed I misspelled acres on
Oh,
great way
yeah.
to start off.
So it is actually acres, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I had done the banner with that, and then I just changed it because I saw what you'd put on there. So
Yeah.
okay, well, it's good to have you here, Rick. I know we've sort of chatted back and forth in other live streams and premieres, and in a bunch of different channels that we both follow. And the aim of this show is to try and bring all sorts of different, health journeys to the audience to see to try and help people with their journey. So yeah, like I say, I know I've seen you in, I don't know, countless other channels that or a lot of them are keto related, but not all of them are. And your channel right now, is that more of like a homesteading type channel?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Like I saw one of your last videos, or one of the last videos I watched, you were setting up for the maple syrup for the spring.
Yeah. That was recorded back on January 6th, I think. And normally we start tapping in mid-March. I actually started tapping my trees this past Saturday, I think it was, this past weekend, about a month ahead of schedule because it's been so warm. So I'm already tapping the trees, and I'll probably start boiling in the next several days.
Yeah, that definitely is early. Like I know I don't really follow it too closely here in Canada, but it's definitely not happening this soon in the year. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So, like I usually like to, I think you've seen some of the other episodes. I like to try and start off with, a backstory, or get to know you and what your, how you came to changing your lifestyle and going on a health journey, and, basically talk about how it's going.
Yeah. Well, I can start off saying it's going well. I had my last lab work done a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. And everything has vastly improved. And we can get into more details later on that if you want. But I guess my journey actually started, I've mentioned this in different channels and in live chats and different places, but my journey actually started back around 1968. I was in 5th grade in school, and we had a lesson one day on life in the future, and it was 2020, 2030, so present day. And there were many things that they brought up. The most humorous part was they had drawings of what cars would look like, automobiles would look like in 2020. And they said, well, they're going to have to be smaller, more fuel efficient, more aerodynamic. And they had the drawings of the cars, and they looked just like today's cars, little jelly bean things. And this is in 1968, when cars were works of art, a lot of chrome. And I remember looking at those drawings and thinking, oh man, those cars are ugly. And I still think that. But that was the most humorous part of that lesson that day. And there were other things that they had talked about. But I clearly remember the part about food in the future. And they said that the food in the future would be terrible for us, for humans. It would cause all kinds of illnesses and health problems. And they said that would be because the meats would be loaded with chemicals, and I think they said hormones and different things that would affect us. That the vegetables would be loaded with pesticides and different chemicals. That the vegetables and the fruits would be, especially the vegetables, would be lacking in nutrients because corporate farming would take over the majority of the farming, and they would just grow produce like crazy. They wouldn't rust the soil. The soil should be rusted every couple of years and rotate crops and all that. And they wouldn't be doing that. They'd just be growing crops every year. So the soils wouldn't have time to regenerate. So the vegetables would be lacking in nutrients. And again, they'd be covered with chemicals. So all of these different chemicals and hormones and all the stuff that's put into the foods that would be put into the foods would affect us and cause us all kinds of health problems. I clearly remember that. So I was always conscious of that. And then I started noticing in the 1980s, people were getting heavier. And they were pushing more fast food and pushing different types of food in the supermarkets. And I remember telling people back in the 80s, watch what you're eating. You know, I learned a long time ago that food's going to be bad for us. And I think that's why we're all getting bigger. And I was kind of blown off at the time, like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. You're full of it. But I think there's more knowledge of that now. So I've always been conscious of that, but it's still caught up to me because the food that we were buying was store-bought food. So I was always healthy, you know, maintained my weight, and didn't have any health problems up until my mid-50s. And then it started catching up to me. I started putting on weight. And there's another reason for that. It was, you know, personal situations. So I started putting on weight, and I got to the age where, you know, people were telling me, oh, you should go see the doctor, get yearly physicals. So I started going every year. And so, you know, they do the lab work every year. And I noticed things increasing in the lab work that shouldn't be increasing. And my blood pressure was going up. My glucose started going up. There were other things too. Oh, my cholesterol was high. Oh, that's always been kind of high. About 2 years ago was when I really started to notice an increase in my blood glucose levels. And that's when I thought, I got to do something. And I thought back to 1968 in that class that we had. And I said, I think this is all because of the food that we're eating. So I started researching, researching online, going to different YouTube channels. One of the first ones that I went to was Dr. Ken Berry. And one of the first videos I watched, he was talking about the bad food that we're eating. And, you know, he mentioned the proper human diet. And I don't know if I ever called it that. You know, this whole time I had this lesson in my head, I don't think I ever called it the proper human diet. But I remember thinking, we're not eating properly. We have to eat proper food. So when I watched his video, he'd mentioned the proper human diet and taking all this junk out of the diet, the standard diet, American diet. He'd mentioned all the processed grains, and that's another thing that we learned about in our class with all these hybridized foods and grains and processed stuff. So he was talking about that, and I thought to myself, this guy's mentioning the same exact thing that I learned back in school way back when. So I started watching more of his videos, and that is really what got me started on my journey back to better health. So I switched to a keto diet. It's been about a year. It was sometime a little over a year now, sometime in January of last year when I talked to my wife. I said, this is it. We have to change our diet, and here's what we need to do. So I've been on that diet ever since. And as a result, I'm seeing some improvements in my different markers.
Yeah. Dr. Berry, I think above anything else, the best part about him, I guess it might turn some people off, but he doesn't sugarcoat anything, you know,
right?
Pun intended kind of thing. Like he he tells it like it is, and he doesn't apologize for anything. Like, and I think that the fact that he is sort of lived through it, he knows that he gave the wrong advice to a lot of people for a long time. So yeah, I always point people towards Dr. Barry for their research, at least, because you can pretty much trust what he has to say about it. Yeah. As far as community and support goes, there's other avenues for that, but yeah, definitely he's just watching his introduction, like his Keto 101 videos, can certainly put it into perspective for a lot of people, just in plain English.
Yeah. There are other channels I've been watching since then. Other doctors, there's Dr. Boz and Dr. Berg, and a few others. And then other individual YouTube channels like yours and Semi-Retired Bob and Ketorific Journey with Mike, to name a few. So I've been learning a lot.
Yeah. And there's a lot, again, that's one of the bonuses of, I guess, being in this sort of keto community, is there is a lot of good channels and a lot of good people out there and we all have sort of the same aim or long-term aim with it, is just to help people. Like, I know, like, say, when I started YouTube, it was, I just wanted to share my experiences, and right from day one, I never really considered it to be something that it was, I would eventually really try and take seriously. It was just kind of a hobby at one point, and it's still really a hobby because I don't make anything off of it, but it's turned into something where I have, at least recently, why I'd want to be part of that community that can help and be, there if someone stumbles across my videos like you did, Dr. Berg or Dr. Barry, then that's sort of my hope for it. So,
yeah.
So I guess what's the, so you say you've been keto for about a year now, and it's,
yeah.
So you're both you and your wife are doing it, or is it just?
Well, no. I'm probably more strict on the diet. She was having issues too, so she cut back on her meals and the amount of meals that she eats. She eats once a day, about 3 o'clock. That's it. Cut back on a lot of the the sugars and some of the carbohydrates. And she used to like ginger ale. She cut that out. Cut out all the snacks and things. So she's not as strict, but she will eat once a day. She's been doing that for probably about a year now. Where I'll do it occasionally, but I can't do it every day. I can't eat just once a day. But I do have a 24 window, so I'll fast for 20 hours most days, and then so I'll eat my first meal about noontime, and then I'll eat again about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then that's it. I don't have anything after 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock at the latest.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I've thought about trying, because right now I have about a 20/4 window as well, but it typically winds up being like 4 p.m. till 8 p.m. or 8:30 kind of thing. Just to, and I try and stop eating a couple hours before I know I'm going to bed. But I have heard a lot lately about the benefits of pushing back that last meal earlier in the day. It can even help more with your sleep hygiene. And, there's a lot of people out there saying that that's, if you're going to fast, that's one of the ultimate, like the optimal ways to do it.
Yeah.
And then, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. One other thing I've done is how can I put it? I changed doctors. I was going to say I fired. I don't know if I want to say I fired, but I no longer have the traditional doctor. Because Dr. Barry has mentioned this in his videos, that you're kind of on an assembly line. When you go to the traditional doctor, you have 15 or 20 minutes, and they rush you in. Well, they rush you in, but then you sit there for 15 minutes waiting for the doctor. You go into the room and you wait. Then they come in and they kind of go through the motions and they ask questions, and they're not really listening. And I tell them, I got this wrong and that's wrong. And they go, well, I don't know. You're getting old. That's all. That's all it is. And the most they do is prescribe a pill for something. Well, here's a prescription. Go take this pill. And I always thought, well, that's not fixing the problem. That's just masking the symptoms. Mm-hmm. So I did that for a few years. I decided back around June of this year, it was coming up time for my annual physical. I thought, I don't want to go see the same doctor again and go through the same, assembly line process. Mm-hmm. So I started looking for a holistic or naturopathic doctor. So I found a doctor nearby, a naturopathic doctor. So I've been seeing her since August. So when, our first meeting, and most of our appointments are about 45 minutes, maybe 60 minutes. So it's not the quick 15 mm-hmm. minutes in and out, shove you out the door, and move on to the next patient. Mm-hmm. The first appointment was, I think, an hour and a half. So she gets plenty. It's expensive, but I've said before, what's your health worth? Mm-hmm. So it's an hour and a half. My insurance doesn't cover the naturopathic doctors. I pay out of my pocket. But the first meeting was an hour and a half, and kind of went through my whole history and what I was experiencing currently and what I needed and what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I want to get off all the meds, for one thing, all the pharmaceuticals. And told her what I had been doing, how I changed my diet. And she's 100% behind me. I didn't get any of this, well, that diet's going to kill you. That's no good for you. Don't do this. Keep taking these prescriptions. It was none of that. So she's 100% behind it. What I was doing when I first started seeing her is I usually had my breakfast around 8 or 9 a.m. some days, and then other days would be more like 11 or 12 o'clock. Then I'd have my last meal around 5 o'clock. And she said, have you ever considered one meal a day or a 20-hour fasting period? And I said, well, yeah, I've thought about it. So, well, can you do it? Do you think you can do it? And I said, sure, I can do it. Mm-hmm. At least especially the 20-hour one. So she said, perfect. There's a lot of benefits to that. You'll see great improvements if you do that. So she was one that really got me on the 20-hour fasting. It's been fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I say, I've heard lots of great things about it. I'm sure that the benefits are many. With me, at least personally, I find the fasting thing turns into something that I do too much, I guess. Or at least that's the way, like, maybe year 3 of my 4-year journey went kind of thing. I was fasting too much and not eating, which isn't bad in itself, but when you're not eating enough, you still have to have the right amount of fuel. And that's one of the benefits, but one of the drawbacks I find with a low carb lifestyle is half the time you're just not hungry, but you still have to have the fuel. And so it's a matter of trying to make sure that you can fast all you want, but you still have to refeed when you are eating.
Yeah. I've noticed, it's not so much the last few days, but last week and maybe over the weekend, I went through a period where I was really hungry and I couldn't wait for that noontime meal. I was really looking forward to food. Mm-hmm. So there were a few days where I would eat at 11 o'clock or 11:30 just because I was so hungry, and I would eat a lot. And then for my 4 o'clock meal, I would eat a lot. I was really, my body was telling me it needed some more fuel or something. So that lasted for about 5 or 6 days. And now I'm back to where I was, where I can wait till noontime and eat. I'm just not all that hungry. Usually what I'll have is an omelet, like a 3 egg omelet, or 3 or 4 fried eggs and some bacon or something. And then I'm good until my 4 o'clock meal. And then I'll have a steak and maybe some spinach or something. Then I'm fine.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think our bodies are really pretty smart when you're treating them properly. They'll let you know when you need to refeed, and that's one of the things I like about the way Dr. Barry sort of views it. He's always been the one to say, if you're hungry, eat. And then eat until you are full, and until you're comfortably full, and then stop eating. And which is great advice, but the problem is that I think it takes a while of eating proper foods before people can really truly even understand what it actually means to be hungry or even full. Because when you're eating all the processed, carbohydrates and grains and stuff like that, you may feel full, but you're not actually full. And the carbs that you're eating are making you hungry, but you're not actually hungry. It's just the way your body's responding to the carbs, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
and that's one thing that I was doing. I was getting into, before I started this, I was getting into the rut where I constantly wanted to eat. If I wasn't eating a meal, I was snacking on something. Even if I was sitting at my desk at work, I was snacking on something. And there was always, in the office that I worked in, there was always bowls with chocolate, Hershey's Kisses or M&Ms or Snickers or whatever. So I was always snacking on those. And I'd have, a bag of nuts or something in my desk, and I'd start munching on those. So I was eating almost nonstop. And I think that's really what started to push my glucose levels up, was that constant eating.
Yeah, not letting your body get back to a baseline basically ever while you're awake. The only time your body can sort of recover is when you're sleeping, and that's doesn't wind up being enough. I was the same way too. I was, not only was I eating all the crap food, I was eating all day long, and it's luckily I sort of got to a breaking point early enough that I didn't wind up, in a position where I had to try and get myself off medications. But I was getting pretty close to that point. So, but I like hearing the stories, like yours and like Bob's and, Tom Garvey and everyone that's been able to say, these people were taking 15 different medications, and a year later, they may not be off all of them, but most of them, they've been able to get rid of. So those are the kind of, losing weight and all that is great. I love losing weight and all that, but I think, like you say, you may have to pay a little bit more to get the support from your medical practitioner, like a holistic provider. But if that means you're going to pay less in pharmaceuticals, then I think that's a fair trade.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. It's the same with foods, right? Eating good these days is not cheap. It's still cheaper to buy a box of Kraft Dinner and just fill yourself up on that than it is to buy a carton of eggs, which doesn't really make any sense to me. But it's a worthwhile trade-off, I think, is to spend a bit more on what you're putting into your body so that you don't have to pay to medicate symptoms.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. The vast majority of our foods now come from local farms. So we grow a lot of fruits and vegetables here on our property. That's one reason why we bought this property 23 years ago, was to be able to, it was in the back of my mind too. I wanted to expand what we can grow here. So we're growing our own food. We're not getting all this pesticide laden food from the grocery stores. But so our steaks come from one local farm. Our dairy, we don't get a lot of dairy. We'll occasionally get some milk. It's all raw, unpasteurized milk. Milk and yogurt and what's the other stuff called? I forget what it's called now. But we get all that from another local farm, dairy farm. What we don't grow as far as vegetables, during the summer we can get from another local farm, a lot of fruits and vegetables from that farm. So the only thing we buy in the grocery stores now are dry goods and things you just can't really get locally.
Sure.
There's really no food from the grocery store. Eggs we'll get locally, or we may buy some organic eggs at the grocery store. Otherwise, it's the laundry soap and like I said, the dry goods that we get at the local, at the grocery store.
Right.
But we pay more for that food because it's locally grown. But we know there's no hormones, no pesticides, no chemicals. So we pay a little more for that than you would at a grocery store. But it's good food. We know what we're getting. And it fills us up. It satiates us. So we're not eating a lot. So overall, our grocery bill is probably no more than what we were paying, maybe even less overall than what we were paying at the grocery store, a year ago. And again, as I mentioned, we're more healthy. So what's that cost us?
Yeah. It's I try and do the same thing too. Like, at least with most of our sort of protein, like beef and that, I can get from actually our real estate agent that helped us buy the house we're in now. They have a farm 5 minutes away from where we are, and they process all their own beef and chicken and pork and everything else. So I try and buy everything as I can locally, and then another guy 10 minutes away, I get eggs from them. And you're right. I try and limit the amount of things I buy from the grocery store for the same reason, because you don't know what's in it. Like, you can do the best you can, but you're never going to actually know. Even, it doesn't matter what the ingredients list says, there's always stuff in it that you're not going to know about.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
no, that's a good point. I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that don't think about buying from local farms. Like, even if you live in a city, I guess if you live in a big metropolis, then buying from a farm might not be the easiest thing. But, the city we live by or outside of, like, I'm only 20 minutes from the biggest city in the area, and the farms are only 5 minutes from me. But so that means everybody in the city could be buying from local farms.
Yeah.
But, and I get it, it's, people do the best they can. And unfortunately, everybody still sort of believes what they're being told by the people that they trust. Right.
Yeah.
And it unfortunately, that trust, at least for me, was broken, 50 years ago. So,
yeah.
So, you were mentioning off the top that you just got some new numbers for your blood work, and they're looking pretty good.
Yeah, I can go over some of those if you want.
Sure. Yeah.
So let's see. I'll go back a little bit to before I switched over my diet. Let me find the paperwork here. So in December of 2021, so again, I started my keto diet in January of 2022. So this was about a month before I switched to the keto diet. So I've got the lab results here, and this was like the final straw. So I've got to do something. So my I won't go over everything because there's so many numbers here, but my cholesterol, total cholesterol was 259. I've had high cholesterol for years, and it's usually bounced around between low 200s to high 200s. So my cholesterol in this test was 259. My HDL was 38. Triglycerides were 137. LDL was 192. My cholesterol HDL-C ratio was 6.8. My non-HDL cholesterol was 221. And then for the first, I think it was the first time, my A1C was 5.7. I think that was the first time, or maybe the second time it was 5.7. And it had been bouncing around. I had a few, this is just about the time they started checking them for my A1C. It might have been a year or two before, or 1 or 2 labs before that, they started checking my A1C. And it was bouncing around like 5.7, 5.6. And my glucose, they didn't check the glucose on that test, but the one from June of 2021, my glucose was 113. So fast forward to my latest test. My total cholesterol is 189. Triglycerides are 72. Let me find some of the others here. What did I read off? My HDL is 50. My ratio, the cholesterol, the HDL-C ratio is 3.9. My A1C is 5.5. And my glucose is 94.
So pretty much everything important went in the right direction then.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the lab results that I get, they color code everything. It's through Boston Heart Diagnostics. So what they do is any of these numbers that are good are in green. Anything that's sort of borderline is yellow, and anything that's high risk is in, I think it's red. I have a black and white copy here. Yeah, it's in red. Everything has improved. I have nothing in red now. I have about half of all my markers are in green, and the others are in yellow, and they're toward the low end. There's a range for the yellow, and they're toward the low end of that yellow range. So they're close. They're closer to being in the green. So everything's improved. Yeah. The one odd thing that I had was that, and the first test that I had done was in August after I switched to the new doctor. He had lab work done. My A1C was, on the first one was 5.6, and my glucose was 98. So they dropped a little bit from the prior lab work in 2021. So I thought, well, that's an improvement. It's not where I want it to be, but it's an improvement. So I was happy with that. And I thought, okay, well, we'll keep working away at this, and they should improve. And the next lab work, I've been having this done about every 3 months. Then the next lab work was in November, and for some reason my A1C went up to 5.8, the highest it's ever been, and my glucose was 103.
Right.
Well, but everything else had improved. All the other markers, the cholesterol and everything else had improved. And then in the last result, like I said, the A1C went down to 5.5 and the glucose went down to 94. So I don't know if it was some kind of anomaly or what that those increased on that November test.
Sure. Yeah, it's, A1C obviously is, a good marker to follow. But, like most people or most doctors will say that unfortunately you can't always there can be other factors that are involved with that, so it's not, and especially with like fasting glucose, is that can be affected by any kind of, external factor that's fairly recent, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things, like, where here in Canada, there's blood work like this is not really a very common thing unless you really push for it. So I just basically rely on the knowledge that what I'm doing is what I should be doing, and I don't worry too much about it. But that's excellent that you're able to have actual data that tells you that what you've done over the last year has, people don't realize that going from 5.7 to 5.5 takes you out of a pre-diabetic range into almost a normal range.
Right.
Like, it doesn't sound like much, but that really is a big accomplishment for something like that.
Yep.
So
the other thing I didn't mention was my blood pressure. For a while, up until about a year ago, a little over a year ago, my blood pressure, for a number of reasons, probably diet related, but also work related, a lot of stress. My blood pressure was usually like 190 over 100, thereabouts. Now it's down, not perfect, but it's getting there. It's usually like 130 to 140 over about 65, in that range.
Yeah.
So I'm still working on getting it down there, but it's certainly a whole lot better than it was.
Yeah. Well, once you get rid of all that inflammation that comes with the bad diet, it certainly, at least I've found that the majority of the people that stick to a diet like this will find their blood pressure start to normalize. Again, I'm not a doctor by any means, but from what I've heard of talking to, thousands of people about this, that it does, it doesn't always happen right away, but getting rid of the inflammation is certainly a big step. And then the other part, and one of the things I've tried to do recently is manage stress, like outside stress, start to forget about things that I can't control, and, just deal with what I can. And then, I found that life's a lot easier to deal with when you don't, when you can try and control that stress.
Yeah.
It's not always possible, but.
Well, I retired in April because I was in a real stressful job, so that wasn't helping. So I decided, well, I'm going to retire. I'm not taking all of my different pension plans. I'm collecting one pension plan. I put off collecting my Social Security, and I'm not tapping into my 401ks or anything else. So money's a little tight, and I am working here and there, and I may have to go back to work like 4 days a week or something. But I had to get out of that stressful job.
Right.
It was a real stressful job. It was a pressure cooker, and I had to get out of there. So I told everybody, sorry, but I've got to do this, or I'm going to be 6 feet under pretty soon.
Sure.
So,
yeah. There's no reason to, and I know a lot of people probably stay with jobs that are killing them, literally. But ultimately you have to think about your health first. It's easy. It's easier said than done, obviously, but you only get one life. So, a lot of people are of the opinion, well, if you're only going to live once, then you might as well just enjoy every moment of it, which I guess I can see their point. But, my point is that I'd rather feel as good as I can for however many years I'm going to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm certainly feeling better. Again, part of it's probably less stress, but I think the diet has a lot to do with it. I'm certainly feeling a lot better. Bob has mentioned many times how, I think he mentions it at the beginning of every video, that 9 months ago he could barely stand for not more than a couple of minutes. And I was at that same point. For the last few years, I was having a lot of I think because of inflammation, I was having a lot of pain in my lower legs, all the way from my knees all the way down into my ankles and my feet. I had what's called plantar fasciitis.
Fasciitis, yeah.
Swelling in the ankles, all my calf muscles, and the shins, everything ached, and I could barely walk into work from the parking lot. And it was so bad that I would think about, okay, I've got to walk, like here at the house, I've got to walk out to the barn. So is there anything else I need while I'm going that way? Because I don't want to walk it again.
Sure.
Now I'm walking about 2-3 miles a day. I've been out playing hockey. So a lot of that, I'd say 99% of that pain is gone. My whole body feels better. For a while, I think every joint in my body was aching from all the inflammation. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a disease or arthritis or something.
Sure.
That's all gone. So it's really helped.
Yeah. And I experienced the same thing, joint pain, knee pain, sore back. I would always recover, but it would take quite a long time. If I hurt my back, it would take weeks for it to feel better. Whereas now, if I do something strenuous and I feel like a backache or something, then it's usually gone the next day. It's not I still get aches and pains, but they don't seem to linger the way they used to.
Yeah. Well, I still have aches and pains, but they're from abusing my body when I was younger.
Yeah.
But it's not,
sure.
it's not the constant aches and pains of inflammation and whatever else was affecting me.
Sure. Cool. Well, I won't take up too much of your time, but I do like to ask each guest sort of, along the lines of trying to help people with these kinds of changes in their lifestyle. If there was anything that you'd like to, as far as recommending things to how to start, or, what you wish you'd known ahead of time. Like, it sounds like you've had this in the back of your mind for a long time. So I think you were probably may have had an advantage over people that are just waking up to what's going on. But if there's something you could tell people just starting out on this, what would what kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah. Cut out the junk food. I've talked to several people. A lot of people have asked me about what I'm doing. So I do work a few jobs here and there, and talk to friends, and so they'll ask me, well, or see people I haven't seen in a long time. One thing I didn't mention was that I've lost about 45 to 50 pounds. I was 190 pounds. I'm 5'5". 190 pounds was a lot of weight for me. I'm down to about 145 now. I dropped down to 140 and back up to about 145. And I think that's because I had that 5 or 6 day window where I was eating like crazy. So I'm back up to 145 now. But so a lot of people ask me, well, what are you doing? So I tell them I changed my diet. I get all, this healthy food. And it's the keto diet. Look into it. Do it if you want to be healthy, if you want to lose weight, improve your health, check into the diet, keto or carnivore. But I've told people, don't just jump right into it. Look into it, take your time. First, just cut out the junk food, cut out the sugars, cut out the candy, the potato chips, cut out the carbohydrates, and work your way into it. One thing I did do before I started the diet in January of last year is I did cut out some of that snacking I had mentioned earlier, the nonstop snacking. I cut that out and cut out a lot of the candy and stuff, the chocolates at work. I did cut some of that out. So I did lose a few pounds in that period. And then the rest was after I switched to the keto diet. So I think that was more my my introduction and my phase in to the keto diet. So I didn't go completely cold turkey. But there was a huge change in January of last year. So that's what I would tell people is cut out the junk first, and the constant snacking, and let your body kind of adjust to the less food, and work your way into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. It's a lot of people can benefit from doing exactly that, just getting rid of the worst offenders first, because you're right, doing like a wholesale overnight complete 180 of what you've been living for decades is a tough thing to do. Some people have to do it that way. That's the way I did it, because unfortunately I don't do well with like incremental change. I can't stick to it. So I just do things like, when I quit smoking 30 years ago, it was okay, I'm tired of this. Tomorrow I quit. And I did. Same thing with keto. I was a January 1st kind of deal. So the January 1st, when I started, I just did a switch. But again, like you say, a lot of people could benefit from hearing that, saying you don't have to just jump right in. You can, like you say, get rid of the worst stuff first and then work your way into just eating proper food. Like you say, we get back to this whole proper human diet thing that just makes sense really when you look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. This has been a great conversation. The thing with keto, and so far, anybody I've talked to, basically everybody has different information to bring to it. We all have sort of the same goal in mind, health and longevity, but I think we all bring a different aspect to how to do it. So it's been a great conversation to have with you, and I hope people can take this information and help it with their journey along the way.
Yeah. There's one thing I wanted to mention, if you do have a minute.
Yep.
So one thing that the new doctor wanted me to do was track my glucose readouts. So she had me for a while doing it almost daily, and actually twice a day. So fasting, and then after I ate. So I did actually, before I started seeing her, I bought the little home kit, to test your glucose. And I checked it in around April, because I was curious at that point. I'd been on the keto diet for about 4 or 5 months. So I wanted to see, actually, I think it was in June that I did it. Wanted to see where my glucose was. The last reading was 113 through the lab work from the doctor. It was 113, I had mentioned earlier. So I tested myself, was all happy, wanted to see where I was. And I had a reading of 124. That's going in the wrong direction, big time.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's about. It was the first time I ever did it, so maybe I did it wrong. I don't know. Maybe I didn't wash my hands or something, but that was concerning. So I didn't do it again until I started seeing this new doctor, and she said, "Start checking your glucose. I want to see a report." So I've got a spreadsheet that I keep track of everything. So for a while, I was doing it pretty much every day. I do it in the morning. So I was having readings when I first started, primarily in the 90s, 95, 98, 100, somewhere around there. And then it gradually started to drop. Now I'm getting readings in the 70s and 80s. So vast improvement. What's odd, and I did talk to the doctor one day about this, she says probably my body recalibrating somehow. So what happens is the readings will drop day by day. So it'll be 87, and then 84 and 81, and get down into the 70s. And then all of a sudden it'll spike back up into the 90s. And it'll be 95, 98, 100. And it'll be like that for a few days, and then it'll start dropping back off again. So I talked to her about that. She says, yeah, it's probably your body recalibrating, or maybe your body saying, hey, what's going on here? Or, the glucose should be up like 100. It's 78. And this is kind of my guess. And maybe it's the body's just saying, hey, we need more glucose, and it's pumping more into the system. And then it's happy and it drops off again. So she really wasn't concerned about it. She said, no, you're overall, as I mentioned in the last result, it was 94 for the glucose for that day. And A1C of 5.5. She's, you're heading in the right direction. And she did make one point. She said, this is going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight. These improvements aren't going to happen overnight. You've been eating wrong for I'm 66 now. So you've been eating wrong for 65 years. Don't expect huge improvements overnight. Give it time. But generally they're in the 70s and 80s. And I don't check it every day now. I check it 2 or 3 times a week. And then if I check it in the morning, I'll check it. And I try to do it in half an hour before I eat. So if I'm home, I'll check it around 11 a.m. If I'm going to work, I'll check it before I leave for work. And then I'll check it again after my 4 o'clock meal, usually an hour or so afterward. And those readouts are still usually 10 to 15 points higher than the morning readout. So those are usually in the 90s, might be 90, 95, 99, somewhere around there. So she was happy with those readouts as well. So I guess, I would say to people, give it time. Don't expect huge changes overnight. It's going to take time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that point about, unfortunately, and that's why I try not to even call this a diet, because, you're just like you say, you're recalibrating your body. You're trying to get it to operate properly. If you treat it like a diet, then, and have that, oh, well, I want results overnight, then unfortunately you're just going to be disappointed, because that's not how it works. But if you can give it a year, 2 years, whatever, even, when I try and talk to people at first, it's always give it 90 days. Come back to me in 3 months after giving it a serious try for 90 days. And if you can't tell me that you haven't completely changed the way you feel, then I'd be completely surprised, because, it does work, and like you say, it's things like blood glucose. There's so many factors that go into it. And you're right. Your body's constantly saying, okay, well, we need to produce more glucose, because, we still need it. It's not like it's something that our body doesn't use, but letting our body produce it rather than taking it in by food is always going to be better for your overall health.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been great. Like I say, it's always good to bring, like, I think you're the first guest that has actual, data from blood tests that can show what even just 1 year can do to your overall health. Again, we're not doctors, so we can't drill down to the specifics about everything. Like, I know the basics about cholesterol. You want your LDL as low as possible, HDL you want as high as possible, and you want your triglycerides to be, again, as low as possible. And based on the numbers that you've given us tonight, that's what that's what's happened over the last year. So, to be able to show people like definitive results like that, yes, you've lost weight. Yes, you're feeling better, but a lot of people want to see that change in the actual, I guess, sort of metrics from blood tests. So,
yeah. And one thing that would help improvement too is exercise. I mentioned earlier that I'm walking a couple of miles a day. The doctor wants me to do more strenuous exercise, like running and weightlifting or swimming or something. So in our last meeting a week or two ago, I said, well, that's fine. And I'm all for it, but I've got bad knees from some surgery, so I'm limited to what I can do with my knees. And I've got a bad shoulder here from playing hockey, so weightlifting is an option. So she had mentioned like swimming. Said, well, do something that's not very impactful on your knees and your shoulder, maybe swimming, something like swimming. But she wanted me to get 30 minutes of heavy exercising where I'm really pumping the heart hard. So she was basically said, step up your game and you'll get even more improvements. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, as far as exercise goes, like I don't know how it sounds like you're probably sort of in the same boat. Like when I first started, I just focused on diet. Luckily I'm active all day long at work, so I've been able to even be more active. But when people ask me about it, I tend to just say, okay, well, focus on one part at a time. Let's fix your diet first. And then we can get into getting into starting to lift heavy things and get into the heavier workouts, because that's when you can see the benefits multiply. Once you're healthy enough, you can add that exercise and, reap the benefits even more.
Right. And as I mentioned earlier, it's, I could barely walk a year ago. So I feel a whole lot better, and I can go out and walk a few miles.
Yeah. Yeah. Like again, and it was the same with Bob, to be able to sit here and talk to you about what you do now, and then for you to say a year ago, I could barely walk. That to me right there is, the motivation that I hope people, or the inspiration that I hope people get from conversations like this, to say, well, maybe that's where I am now, but if I can concentrate and stick with it for, 9 months, a year, 2 years, whatever, maybe I can get to that point too, where the quality of life goes up.
Yeah. I have to say, Bob and Sheena are very inspirational. Their videos are really inspirational. With Bob walking how many miles a day, getting out there every day and walking, and Sheena doing her walking in place, and she hasn't done that a while on her channel, but for a while she was walking in place and talking, and it was a lot. Plus, different things that she had mentioned in her videos. They're both very inspirational.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's why I'm trying to bring everybody's story together here, so that we can all try and help as many people as we can. So, okay, so I think we'll wrap it up there, unless you have anything else you want to add to the episode.
No, I just appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for bringing me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So.